The head of the serpent dragon. My name is Daniel Vallis and welcome to our channel. We are at an amazing time right here. So many signs coming together telling us this is an expected time. We see the day approaching when we are expecting our Redeemer, Jesus Christ, to start making his enemies his footstool. That day of indignation that is approaching when he said he will accomplish that. Fulfilling prophecy that goes back to the Garden of Eden. And we know in context right before that time of judgment starts, he will be calling his wise and faithful servants into the chamber of safety, the time of sparing. And so we are expecting the rapture any day now, any moment now, because we've been looking and examining how the signs are so strongly declaring in the heavens right now. This is a time that we see literally in the evening approaching. We can see in the sky loudly declaring right now this is an expected time for him to make his enemies his footstool. With so many passages and prophetic mentions in Scripture that we've seen visually rehearsed, visually being displayed right now. And we've also been examining how these celestial signs will not last for much longer at all. We're at a time where these signs are being loudly declared right now. We've looked at how Jupiter is at the foot of Ophiuchus right now, the right foot, which is a foot of power, but also represents the foot that was stung by the adversary. So the picture and the prophecy relating to him making his enemies his footstool, particularly the one who bruised his heel before, that same picture is picking up that same chapter right here. The heel that was bruised, we have the same expectation that this same foot will be making his enemies his footstool. That same enemy by the same foot. The story picking up and continuing right here what he prophesied he said he would do. We see it loudly declared in heavens right now, and we've also examined how these celestial signs will quickly drop off right after this. And we've examined how the Lord has been giving so much wisdom at this time. And praise the Lord for everything he is showing us. He has brought us on this learning journey, going all the way back to 2014 for some with the blood moons, 2015 with the Star of Bethlehem signs. And he's been leading us along this path, showing us so many incredible nuggets of wisdom and his majesty and handiwork in the heavens on his celestial clock, showing us the time, showing us, yes, I'm showing you, I'm trying to tell you this is the time you will see the day approaching. He's been rehearsing a story, a tapestry of redemption, telling the story of the root and the offspring of David, the one who is coming quickly. And the more that we get into the Word and we see the length and the height and the breadth and the depth of it all, we can start to see more of how this is visually declared in the heavens right now. It's being rehearsed specifically with these rare celestial signs, this whole ribbon and choreography of celestial events that will not be repeated. It's meant to be catching the world's attention right now. It's declared to all the world. And these signs are easily seen. They are meant to be seen, because they tell time. You don't need telescopes or binoculars, although they can help, but we can see these declared along the line in the heavens. And praise the Lord for all the details and the granular information that he's been showing us. There's a lot that we don't know in this modern time. We're not just as familiar with the celestial clock because we live inside a lot most of the time, so we're not as familiar. So he's been really catching us and getting us up to speed on a lot of things about how do the heavens work. What are the celestial mechanics? How does the clock work? What is it showing? And he's been showing us incredible things, especially lately. Very much emphasizing this is a high time of expectation. There's a lot that's coming together right here at the foot of Ophiuchus. Far more than we even realized before. He is showing us so many things. Praise his name for how he leads us and guides us. He wants us to know, because the bridegroom is giving the call. The bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. He wants us to draw nigh to him. He wants to sup with us. And he wants us to be ready. He wants us to see the day approaching. And it is so clearly declared in the heavens right now. We have full expectation of the real-time sign accomplishment of this next chapter in prophecy, where he's going to start making his enemies his footstool. We truly do see the day approaching, and so much coming together right here in the days ahead. If you are new to our channel, I highly recommend you check out our resources in the description box for our PDFs, Understanding God's Celestial Clock. Get a understanding of astronomy from a biblical perspective. Why does the Bible point out different things? Our PDF, The Heavens Declared, is a great Astronomy 101 introduction and just gives a great recap and review of what have we seen since 2014 through 2018, primarily dealing with the tapestry of redemption. What has been declared with these rare and unique celestial signs. And then, of course, the Revelation chapter 12 sign, which goes very in-depth on that particular subject. A lot of research in there. So I invite you to check them out and review them. Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And this is our biblical perspective. We deal with astronomy. Astrology is a distortion of what God created, so we don't deal with that. We deal with astronomy, studying the mechanics of the celestial lights that are in the firmament, the lights that are meant to be seen, the lights that he tells us from the very beginning. The number one reason is they're going to be for signs. You should expect them to be for signs, but you need to look at them from a biblical perspective in a biblical way. And they will tell you time and seasons, appointed times, agriculturally, but also prophetically as well. And all three of these aspects will go together. When you know the time and an expected season, you should not be surprised to find the signs as well, and then vice versa. When you see signs that catch your attention in the celestial lights, it's going to be a big beacon and signal to the season you're in and the time. And when we know the time, we should live accordingly. And again, for us today, we're not as familiar with how the celestial clock works because we're more dependent on technology and we live inside more today and just around artificial lights so much more. But we got to remember, for thousands of years, they did not have clocks and they didn't have all the electronic gadgets and the artificial lighting that we have today. They grew up with the only clock that they had was the celestial clock. You would grow up being shown how to use a sundial. If you were in particular trades, such as a sailor or fisherman, you'd really know how the celestial clock works because you also would use it for celestial navigation to get around and to tell your latitude, and also keeping track of the moon so you'd know how the tides flow and what areas would be safe during certain times, whereas other times it might have dangerous rocks that you need to watch out for. Today we often discount how the ancients were far more familiar with the celestial clock and depended on it and used it regularly. They were very familiar with it. It was common knowledge how a lot of the things that the Bible describes and references, it was common knowledge to them because they lived with it in a daily use. It was the only clock that they had. Whereas us today, we're out of use of it and out of familiarity with it, so we're having to do a lot of learning. But the more that we start to learn it and see it, we can start to see how, yes, those who lived in Bible times and even the New Testament times, they were fully aware of these concepts that the Bible was referencing. It was everyday knowledge to them. And every now and then the Bible will drop hints with Paul's speech on Mars Hill where he quoted the most popular astronomical writer at that time for hundreds of years at that time, very well known. Every now and then the Bible drops hints that, yes, they fully knew all about the constellations. They knew what the fiery red dragon was. They knew these subjects that the Bible is talking about. So it's good for us to dive into and learn more about the mechanics of how the celestial clock works and a lot of the terminology that they would have been familiar with basic astronomy. And that helps us see how the heavens work, see what the heavens declare more, and we can more clearly see the signs that are being declared. And praise the Lord, sometimes we can see it better in hindsight with what the Lord is showing us about the mechanics, how they work. We can look back on this period of celestial signs that we have seen on this tapestry of redemption, and we can see nuggets even in hindsight of, wow, we didn't notice that before. That was so amazing. How the Lord was working and showing something. We didn't realize it at the time, but he was showing us and declaring to the world an incredibly rich, complex story with incredibly rich choreography. And so that's what we're going to review today, some concepts that were familiar primarily to sailors and fishermen again, but how it deals with the prophecy that goes back to bruising the head of the serpent, crushing the head of the serpent. This is also an astronomical event, which we can see on the celestial clock too. So let's do a little bit of review. Recently we looked at the difference between the ecliptic, where the sun moves. The sun moves along this line, the planets, the moon, they move along this line. The sun will move exactly on the line. The other planets will wobble around it, but they'll stay close, and the moon will wobble around it too. And then there's the equator, when differentiates the rotation of the whole sky dome up there around the pole star. Now today the pole star is Polaris and the sky dome rotates almost on top of it, not quite. But if we go back to 3000 BC, around the time a lot of astronomy terms are being started, there's a lot of terminology that goes way, way back and is still used even today in modern times, as we're going to show. But we have to look back in time to find out exactly why were they called that. So if we look back to 3000 BC, the pole star at that time was at the tail of Draco. Interesting, we've been studying that lately, how the sky rotated around Draco. Now over time, because of precession, it has gradually shifted over to where it is today, over at Polaris. So the sky moves around that. So we've been studying these two different axes of rotation, the ecliptic line versus the equatorial line here. And you'll notice that at 3000 BC, the equator went right smack through Hydra, the serpent, right here. And so this was well known to them that the rotation of the whole sky dome, the equator of it, went through Hydra. So Hydra was associated with the equator because it marked the equator. And because all the rotation took place in Draco at his tail, literally, and in that area for both the ecliptic and the equator, Draco was known as the pole of the ecliptic and the pole of the equator. So everything revolves around Draco. That's why in Scripture Draco is seen as the main honcho. It oversees Hydra and Serpent. It's the main one that oversees it, whereas these are aspects of what ultimately goes back to Draco, because all the movement is pegged to Draco. All these others are aspects of it. Now again, the pole star is at Thuban in 3000 BC, but over time up to where today it has shifted up to Polaris, and that's why the autumnal equinox is now in Virgo the Virgin. The fall equinox is right there, whereas 3000 BC it was at Serpent. So we can see way back why certain things started to be associated with certain things, like Hydra, the serpent, but also Draco. Very strong connection, especially there, as you would definitely see the pole star right there and track it right within the tail, literally. But there's two distinct points we want to look at today. This point where these two lines intersect, the equator and the ecliptic. Now, the sun moves along the ecliptic, but when it crosses the equator, that is a node. That's what it's called. But it's called the ascending node, or the head of the dragon. And that is because at that point where it's coming along, now is where it crosses over that equatorial line, and it's now on top of that line, which 3000 BC, Hydra's head was largely above that line. So anything above the equatorial line was just shorthand called, that's at the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent. It's at both of them, because you're rising above the equator, so now you're in the top half that has Draco in it, but also literally the head of the serpent, which is connected again to Draco. So that point where you rise up above that line was called the head of the dragon. A technical term is the ascending node, because it has ascended above the line. So that applies for anything going above the equator, which the sun would mark at the vernal and fall equinoxes. But it also applies to whenever objects traveling along the line, sometimes they're below the line, sometimes they will pass up above it, like the moon will do and the planets will do. Sometimes they'll travel below it, sometimes they'll travel above it. And when they cross the ecliptic line, that wherever that happens, that is also called an ascending node. So if the moon came up above the ecliptic right here, that would be the ascending node for the moon, where it would be at the head of the dragon. And that's just astronomical shorthand for saying where it is and the direction that it's going. It's rising up above the ecliptic, and it has just crossed it. So the ascending node deals with anything that's passing above either the equator or the ecliptic. And that is the head of the dragon, that point where that takes place. For the sun, it happens at that point, or it can happen for the planets and moon at any of the other points as well. The ascending node. The opposite of that is, of course, the tail of the dragon, the descending node. A node or a point where the sun, as it travels along, crosses the equator and now descends below that line that is associated with Hydra the serpent, which his tail is largely below the equator. So that's why it's called the tail of the dragon. Again, ultimately going back to Draco. Now again, we noticed how the fall equinox, the autumnal equinox right here, when the sun crosses the equatorial path, that point is where the equinoxes happen. The spring equinox happens right there, and the fall equinox happens over here. But in 3000 BC, it happened right here at Serpens, and that's why Serpens was associated with the autumnal equinox, that distinct celestial point marker from antiquity, and would be associated with that for quite a while too. Now, just like the ascending node, the descending node, the tail of the dragon, also applies for anything going below the ecliptic. When a planet travels along and goes below the ecliptic, that point, that node, is also called the tail of the dragon, that particular marker, wherever it crosses, here, there, wherever. So we can see two distinct astronomical markers that the ancients would make reference to: the head of the dragon, wherever something rises up above either of those lines, or the tail of the dragon, wherever something goes below any of those two lines. One rises above, ascends above, crosses, and goes below. Now in astronomy, they will use this symbol here to mark, and it's just shorthand for the head of the dragon, the ascending node. And you just use that on charts, so you don't have to spell out ascending node. You just put the symbol next to it, and that shorthand to let you know when it's bowed up like that, it's showing up, going up, and so that planet or celestial body is at the head of the dragon. The other astronomical symbol is the same thing, just rotated, pointing downward, showing it's now crossing below a line somewhere, so it's associated with the tail of the dragon. And both of these are astronomical concepts that were later ripped off by astrology, but they are astronomy. And even today, this reference is still made to the draconic month, going to Draco. Or a nodal month is the period in which the moon returns to the same node wherever it crosses a reference line of its orbit. The nodes are the 2 points where the moon's orbit crosses the plane of the Earth's orbit, which would be the ecliptic. And so even today, this term, the draconic month, the head of the dragon, the tail of the dragon, those associated terms are still used today. They're just not used in common usage. You won't hear them at the dinner table very often, but they are still used today in astronomy and even still in navigation, particularly with sailors. This is very important for us to realize when objects cross the celestial lines of the ecliptic, because this is related to eclipses. Knowing where the moon is important to predicting eclipses. These take place when the sun, earth, and moon are on a line. The three bodies are only on a line when the moon is at one of the nodes. The moon is sometimes up above the ecliptic, sometimes it's below the ecliptic. Eclipses will only happen when the moon is near the ecliptic. That's why the ecliptic is called it, because that's the line where eclipses take place. At this time, a solar or lunar eclipse is possible. The draconic or draconitic month refers to the mythological dragon that lives in the nodes and regularly eats the sun or moon during an eclipse. Now you can see how that got corrupted over time, astronomers referencing the different nodes, the head of the dragon and tail of the dragon. For those not familiar with it, you can see how it got distorted over time of how people started to talk about, oh, a dragon is eating the moon or the sun, because eclipses of the sun or moon will happen at the ecliptic, where those bodies are coming together and crossing the line. So you can start to see why the concept of the head of the dragon point and the tail of the dragon point is very important, even still today, because that is involved with predicting eclipses, knowing how those celestial bodies move and those particular points. And again, in astronomy and orbital mechanics, these are still strongly used, even the symbols, because that's what they represent. The dragon's head, the head of the dragon, or the dragon's tail, the tail of the dragon. And again, this is very important. Even today, with marine navigation, these concepts still come up, this technical information, especially the idea of a draconic month. This is still tracked today by sailors because it tells them the tide. What's going to be the ebb of the tide between low tide and high tide? When is that going to happen? Is all pegged to when the moon is at the head of the dragon, when it ascends up above the ecliptic. That whole path that it makes is a draconic month, where it goes descents again and then starts the whole cycle over again. And on marine navigation tables today, it's still pegged to the draconic month, the ascending node of the moon, when the tide is going to change. If you know when that ascending node is, you just calculate the days after that point and you know exactly what the tide's going to be doing. This is very important even still today, and these terms of the head of the dragon and tail of the dragon are still used today. Just, again, not very commonly, but they are still used today. Now, this is important when we look at some of the celestial events that have happened. We can start to see how this movement, how it was originally associated with these named enemies that we see in prophecy. These are distinct celestial markers. So it bears us to look at the head of the dragon and the tail of the dragon events that have happened within this time frame of this tapestry of redemption especially. Now you remember on August 21st, 2017, the eclipse that happened at Regulus. That got a lot of attention, but most people don't realize that the moon was ascending above the ecliptic at that point. The moon had been traveling along in its cycle. That's where it crossed the ecliptic, and that's where eclipses take place along the ecliptic, because at that time it lined up with the sun being right there too, the moon being right there at the ascending node. But then if you tracked it in the days afterwards, you would notice that the moon was traveling above the ecliptic, rising up above the ecliptic for a while and then starting to go down to the descending node where it'd start traveling below for a while and then doing this whole cycle over again. So the moon does not travel exactly on the ecliptic, it follows it, but it has this variation wave-like pattern as it goes along. And it's slightly short, so every time it comes around, it's in a slightly different position. So that's why there isn't total eclipses every single month. It's because the moon comes back to a slightly different position every single time, even though it has the same cycle that it goes through. But this also helps predict eclipses because its overall cycle also has a cycle, and that's predictable. Now again, the eclipse took place when the moon was at the ascending node, when it's at the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent. Do you see any symbolism there with the eclipse that took place at Leo, right at Regulus? I think you do. And then, of course, the other astronomical marker is the descending node, the tail of the dragon, right over there. And that would be several days later. But there was strong symbolism that most people don't realize of what happened on that American eclipse of August 21st. The heavens were literally declaring the Lion of the tribe of Judah, prophecy relating to that this is a time that deals with the head of the serpent, the head of the dragon. There's a lot more choreography and complexity to the celestial signs that we have seen than many realize. And thinking about the August 21st eclipse, yesterday I was reviewing this information because I was actually working on another video, a separate video from this on a different subject. And I was just recalling this to mind of the eclipse on that day. I was watching it here in Shelby, Alabama. It was a partial here because I wasn't in the line of totality, but I got to see an incredible sight. And I got to see, and I was just thinking about it and reviewing it. Now we saw the sun at Regulus and Leo the Lion on that day, and just the impression it makes on the world, even just seeing a partial of a total eclipse is what I saw. It's a celestial event that you cannot miss. It's meant to stand out. It's a sign that happens in the lights that are in the firmament. And I was also thinking about how just a few hours before that, the night before that, we had gone out, we had looked up, seen Jupiter in Virgo the Virgin. Because we've been following this ever since the Star of Bethlehem signs, especially the lead up through the pregnancy cycle. And we knew we were getting close to the Revelation 12 sign on September 23rd, which at this eclipse, we're only about a month away from it. So Jupiter's heading toward that birth date, and so we could see prophecy coming together. So many stories being told. It was incredible to see this being declared in the heavens, reminding us of the root and the offspring. Who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah? It's the one who sprang out of Judah, who was born of a woman. So there's a lot of stories that were told on that particular day. And particularly the more we've been studying the correlation and choreography of both Jupiter, which is the primary actor, if you will, weaving this story, portraying the Melchizedek figure and type, our king and priest of righteousness. But we've also been seeing it in context of other major celestial events. What other celestial events are going on, and where is Jupiter at that time? Because it's a choreography on this tapestry of redemption. So the Lord really impressed and gave wisdom and understanding that there's a lot more to the eclipses and the head of the dragon story being declared during this time that we should dive into and look into. And he's definitely shown some incredible nuggets when we look back in hindsight. And the more that we understand the celestial mechanics, we can look back and see, wow, it's far more complicated than we realize. He's definitely telling a very strong story. This is not by coincidence at all. The heavens are declaring this is a time we can see the day approaching. We are at a time where he's trying to call our attention to it, rehearse his story, because he's about to do what he said he's going to do in making his enemies his footstool. And so the Lord really impressed me. Dive in more on this subject, because you've seen how the eclipse happened when the moon was at the head of the dragon, which took place right at Leo the Lion, right at Regulus. So you saw the powerful symbolism of the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent there, because of the ascending node there. But have you thought about what is Jupiter's ascending node? Where is Jupiter's head of the dragon, and where is Jupiter's tail of the dragon? How does that fit into this story? Is that part of the story that we've been seeing? How does this relate? Because if we see how it is important in one of the celestial events, certainly we should expect to see it also on the primary actor, the Melchizedek figure that's been weaving this whole story, right? So I pulled up a list of solar eclipses from 2011 to 2021, and I also looked up when did Jupiter reach the ascending node? When did it rise up above the ecliptic? When was it at the head of the dragon? Well, that took place on November the 10th, 2013. That's when Jupiter rose up above the ecliptic. That was when Jupiter was at the head of the dragon. And what is amazing is since that time, Jupiter has been above the ecliptic, at the head of the dragon, on that portion of the ecliptic, this entire time. But it's not going to be there for too much longer. And of course, we're not surprised at that. But on February 25th, 2020, in just a few months, Jupiter is going to be descending. It's going to be at the descending node when it crosses the ecliptic, when it's at the tail of the dragon. And all during this time between those two dates, Jupiter has been above the ecliptic at the head of the dragon, telling and rehearsing a story that deals with bruising and crushing the serpent's head, all during this time. So once I knew the ascending node and the descending node in the time frame, I wanted to see what total solar eclipses took place during this time. The partial solar eclipses are not that rare. They happen pretty regularly, so that's not outstanding by itself. The annular ones happen somewhat frequently too as well. So I just wanted to focus on the total solar eclipses because those are quite a bit rarer and they're a lot more distinct. Particularly how we saw the powerful symbolism with the one that happened on August 21st, 2017. So boiling it down, there were only 4 total solar eclipses that happened between Jupiter reaching the ascending node and when it reaches the descending node. But there is one here on November 3rd, just a few days and hours before Jupiter reached the ascending node, that also happened. This was a hybrid eclipse, which means it's a mix of others. This one was an annular eclipse, like here, how you can see it's not a total one, but then later on it progressed to a total solar eclipse and then phased back to an annular. So it's a hybrid, it's a mix of 2 eclipse types. So this caught my attention, particularly how it happened just a few days, just 1 week before Jupiter reached the ascending node. And this caught my attention because Jupiter reaches the ascending node when half of Jupiter rises above the ecliptic, when the majority of Jupiter rises above the ecliptic. But it'll take about 5 days from when Jupiter starts touching the ecliptic to where it starts getting the majority over on the other side. So you back up just a few days, and about the same time that this hybrid eclipse took place, Jupiter would have been touching, practically getting ready to ascend above the ecliptic. So I took this into consideration with the timing, how it definitely drew attention to eclipses which take place at the head of the dragon, this whole concept. And what was happening just a few days later? Jupiter was also at the head of the dragon too. Now all these eclipses are not the same because some of these took place at the ascending node, like this one that happened just a few days before Jupiter did, but 2 of them also took place at the descending node, at the tail of the dragon, where of course the one that took place August 21st, that was at the head of the dragon. And then one in July 2019 was also at the head of the dragon. So it's interesting to see these differences and the correlation in context of Jupiter during this whole time frame. Let's look at this a little more in depth. We know when Jupiter reached ascending node and also when it is going to reach its descending node. So all during this time, there's only 5, really 4, but this one was right before it. There's only these total solar eclipses. And of course, this first one was a hybrid, but what caught my attention was the eclipse took place right between Virgo and Libra, right where the claws of Scorpius come to. So a very strong reminder when you consider this is an ascending node eclipse that deals with the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent, the head of the dragon. And remember, Draco is a serpent dragon. He is both, and since Hydra relates to Draco, you can say either the serpent or the dragon. It's both, same person. So it's interesting that the series really starts out with an ascending node, head of the dragon, right pointing at a place in the story, reminding us of the one who was born of a virgin, whose heel was bruised by the serpent. These twofold aspects here, bruised his heel, but one day he is going to crush the serpent's head. The eclipse took place right there, just mere hours, really, before Jupiter reached the ascending node and told the exact same story, reaching the head of the dragon. And where was Jupiter at that time? Jupiter at that time was over in Gemini, over in Pollux, pointing to that picture, and that story really goes back to the Garden of Eden. The Greeks over time changed the story to be 2 twin boys, but it really goes back and has long been understood to also relate to Adam and Eve, going back to the Garden of Eden. And even the Hebrew word relates to twinning, a uniting. And that's the promise that goes back to the Garden of Eden. One day we are going to be reunited. We are going to have our fellowship restored with our Creator, just like the Garden of Eden. And so it's very powerful. Here on this day, when there is an eclipse at the woman, right between these major figures that we've been looking at, the heavens are pointing to and declaring, remember this whole story. Remember the Garden of Eden story and prophecy. Right here at this time that Jupiter was also reaching the ascending node, the head of the dragon, right here in Gemini too. Reaching up for it at that point and be crossing in just a few hours. Double stories being declared in heavens at that point in November 2013 that we see in hindsight, and we have a better understanding of it now that we have a better understanding of the celestial mechanics too. But a very strong story being declared in the heavens. Pay attention to the head of the serpent. It is about to be bruised. It is about to be crushed. The one who is born of a woman is about to make his enemies his footstool. A promise that goes back to the Garden of Eden. The very next total solar eclipse took place in March 20th, 2015. Again, these don't happen every year, so they are rare and unique, and they catch our attention. This one caught other watchmen's attention too, particularly because the eclipse took place at the North Pole. A lot of watchmen kind of interpreted it as an international sign, a sign meant to catch the whole world's attention. It wasn't particular necessarily to one location of the world or one country or another. It seemed to be declaring an international sign. And it caught my attention that it was a descending node eclipse. It happened at the tail of the dragon. And where did that take place? It took place in Pisces, right between Pisces and Aquarius, the water bearer, reminding us how Jesus Christ came to bring the living water, to make fishers of men, to redeem the fish, to set the fish free. And this was in 2015, so there's already a lot of anticipation and looking up. People are starting to look up because of the blood moons and starting to notice the celestial events that are going on like never before. They're paying attention to when the eclipses happen, what's happening with the moon, what's happening when these different nodes are reached. And where was Jupiter? Jupiter was over in Cancer the Crab, which is right after Gemini. And that deals with the rest, a promised rest, which also goes back to the Garden of Eden, the eternal rest that is promised through the Redeemer. And where is Cancer? Cancer is right over the head of Hydra the serpent. That eternal rest will only happen when the Lion of the tribe of Judah makes his enemies his footstool. When he crushes the serpent's head, we will have that eternal rest and be united with our Redeemer and Lord forever. That promised, prophesied eternal rest that goes back to the Garden of Eden. Both these stories, again, declared at the same time when more people are starting to look up. Look up. Then we fast forward to 2016, March 9th. Which also caught my attention because it's a descending node that deals with the tail of the dragon. And this one also took place between Pisces and Aquarius, telling the same story as the previous one. And where was Jupiter during this time? Jupiter was at the hind foot of Leo the lion. And for those of you who have been on our learning journey for a while, you may remember that particular date, March 8th and 9th. What was Jupiter doing at that particular date? Jupiter was at opposition at that exact same time when Jupiter was shining the brightest. That same day there was an eclipse over by Aquarius the water bearer, the one who came to bring living water to the fish and set the fish free. Pointing right at the foot of Leo the lion, reminding us of the prophecy by Jacob to Judah, the Shiloh prophecy. This was when the Lord really led us on our journey to start studying the Shiloh prophecy. And this whole tapestry of redemption has been how that has been fulfilled by the one who has been born of a virgin. Shiloh is the offspring. He's also the root. But Shiloh is the one who wrestles the serpent. It was his heel that was bruised by the serpent. It's also Shiloh's heel that is going to crush and bruise the serpent again. So to see that happen on the same day, that same time the Lord is bringing our attention to the Shiloh prophecy was really incredible. And then we jump forward to 2017, the one we're familiar with, the one on August 21st that was at the head of the dragon. That was just a month before the September 23rd sign, the Revelation 12 sign. This sign is so powerful when we consider and just dwell on what is all happening here. Not just an eclipse highlighting, pay attention to the Lion of the tribe of Judah. No, it's happening at Regulus, the little prince, reminding us of the King of the Jews, the one who did come. The one who was the king of the Jews, because he was a Judean. He was of Judah. He sprang out of Judah. The eclipse highlighting that in so many ways, but then also it was at the ascending node, which is highlighting at that exact moment the head of the dragon. The heavens were declaring that he is about to tread on that same adversary. Reminding us of the prophecy, there's more than just that he came. There's a prophecy of what he's going to do. That's what we always got to keep in mind. It's a twofold prophecy. That's why we've seen it rehearsed, reminding us the story will pick up where it left off. And at that same time, Jupiter was in the womb of Virgo the Virgin. Again, you have the twofold promise right here. Our Redeemer sprang out of Judah. He was born of a virgin. He was a seed of the woman, which goes back to the Garden of Eden prophecy. Remember, when God said, a seed of the woman will have his heel bruised by the adversary, by the serpent, but one day he will bruise and crush the head of that same serpent. And so we see on this exact same reminder where it's telling this twofold part of the story. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, who is the root and the offspring, who is now presently holding the title of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He is about to make his enemies his footstool, and it is particularly relating to the head of the serpent, the dragon. That's what the prophecy goes back to. Declared in the heavens so loudly, and a lot of people were watching it and paying attention to it, not even realizing fully what the story was being declared in the heavens. And then recently on July 2nd, 2019, was also a total solar eclipse that was at the head of the dragon. Where did this one take place? This one took place in Gemini. This is very interesting to consider. This is the last total solar eclipse between this time that Jupiter has ascended before it descends. This is the very last one. And where was Jupiter when it ascended? It was in Gemini, at the other figure in Gemini. And this eclipse took place at the other figure in Gemini. Again, reminding us of the Garden of Eden prophecy that relates directly that he is going to bruise and crush the head of the serpent. And where is Jupiter? Jupiter's right above Scorpius, reminding us of Shiloh, the offspring of the woman who sprang out of Judah, who had his heel bruised, but he is going to be crushing the serpent's head. Right at the same time, reminding us of the Garden of Eden prophecy, that he's coming to bruise the serpent's head. All these celestial events are marking off these celestial markers at very specific times, telling a choreograph that all goes together. All these stories are woven together. It's the same story, different parts of the story, but it all relates to each other. And what really caught my attention too was when Jupiter was at the ascending node on November 13th, it was right in this area here of the first figure of Gemini. But it had just started retrograde, which means it was moving that way, toward the second figure. And where did it stop its retrograde? It stopped its retrograde right at this area where this total solar eclipse years later took place. Right here toward the end when Jupiter is getting ready to go back to the descending node. We've had major celestial events with the sun and moon drawing our attention to the head of the dragon at both the ending and the beginning at the same place, telling the same story. The story is interconnected, goes crossways back and forth. It's all between these 2 points. That's the incredible thing of what the heavens are declaring during this tapestry of redemption. It all deals with he is about to crush and bruise the head of the serpent, the head of the dragon. I hope you are starting to see some of the complexity coming together, the choreography of what the heavens are declaring so beautifully about our Redeemer. When we take a wide view here, we can see this time frame that Jupiter has spanned. On November 10th, 2013, that's when Jupiter was at the ascending node, right there, in that first figure of Gemini. When Jupiter was rising up more than halfway, the majority had risen up above the ecliptic line on November 10th. And Jupiter, this whole time, has been traveling above the ecliptic line till February 25th, 2020, when it will finally descend below the ecliptic. All between these 2 points, Jupiter has been always staying completely above the ecliptic, telling a unique story. And again, going back to what it did here, it rose to the ascending node right after it started retrograde. Then it went that way, stopped at that first figure in Gemini, then went the other way in prograde motion. But all during this time, it's been completely staying above the ecliptic line, the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent, all within this time. And it's been rising to a high point just because of its cycle. On September 23rd, the Revelation 12 sign, you could see how high Jupiter was above the ecliptic right there. But then you can also see how it reached the highest point of its whole journey right here by the side of Virgo, approximately near where its hand would be. That's where it reached its high point of its whole journey, right here in the midst of telling this whole story, right here in Virgo. And ever since then, it's been slowly descending again and getting close to the line. Where it is now, it's not too far up above the line. And so when I say after this point it's going to be going downhill, I mean that in more than one way. It's really going to be going downhill. The signs are strong right now, but they're not going to be for much longer at all. In fact, just about another month and then Jupiter will be in line with the sun. You won't be able to see it for about a month either. And then about the midst of January, you will be lucky to see it in the morning. So where we are right now, Jupiter is well above the line, and the signs are strongest right here, but we know the story is going to drop off really, really quick. Our attention is drawn to right here, this lineup, because it's been telling the story that relates to one single story during this whole time. It started with bringing attention to this time frame, a time frame when Jupiter was at the head of the dragon. All during this time it will be at the head of the dragon, and won't change that story until later. All during this time, right when the signs were the strongest, right when Jupiter was at its apex, rising up at its highest here in Leo, Virgo, Scorpius, and Ophiuchus. This is the high point of this whole journey here, right here. All during this time, it's been telling one single story. It's all telling you all what Jupiter is rehearsing during this time. All these celestial signs with Jupiter during this time deal with the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent. Because our Redeemer, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the one who was born of a woman, the one who was offered on our behalf, the one whose heel was bruised, that same individual Shiloh is going to be crushing the head of the serpent. That's been the whole story during this entire tapestry of redemption, which goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden promise. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. That is prophecy in the summation. And that has been fulfilled in different parts throughout prophecy, but we also see where we are right now. The heavens are declaring that second part. He's about to pick up at that same point, right with the bruising of the heel, is going to be picking up where he's going to use that same heel to bruise and crush the head of the serpent. That's the whole story that's been told and declared in the heavens in this window. Looking back, we can be amazed and in awe at the complexity and the choreography that the heavens have declared and are declaring even more so. It puts so much more emphasis on what we're seeing now. When we look back and we see the choreography, the complexity, it's not by coincidence. It's telling a specific story for a specific reason. We can look up, we can lift up our heads, we can see the day approaching when he's going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. Just like the wise men saw the real-time signs, we have the same expectation here. It all deals with the head of the serpent being trodden upon, but ultimately Draco himself, the serpent dragon. And when we study these pictures and the celestial mechanics and the choreography, we can see more strongly how Revelation 12 is really emphasizing the great dragon, Draco, that is in the north, that the world can see, the revolutions and celestial mechanics that were well known, how it all relates to the celestial events that happen along the line are ultimately pegged to Draco. That's why the Revelation 12 sign, he is the main adversary. The great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. All the pictures go back to Draco because that's where they're pegged. And this has been known for thousands of years. And so when we see the celestial events that have happened, drawing attention to the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent, we know exactly the story that's being highlighted in so many ways, told multiple times over, emphasizing he is about to make his enemies his footstool. You know his enemies, they're even named in Scripture. This is about to happen. He is about to do exactly what he said he's going to do. We've been looking at a tapestry of redemption, but also a tapestry of prophecy, what is going to be done. It's a twofold promise, a twofold prophecy. And that's what the story goes back to. That's how it even starts. A constellation that deals with the Garden of Eden being reunited with our Creator, the fellowship being restored. We should not be surprised that the story of making the enemy, the adversary, the footstool, having his head crushed and bruised, that story started being told, highlighting this part of the story, this part of the celestial story being declared along the line. This is where it started being drawn attention to. And of course what happened shortly thereafter, the blood moons happened shortly after in that window, in that time frame, chronologically. 2014, 2015, that brought many right to the Star of Bethlehem that happened right here. And it's been one continuous tapestry of redemption ever since late 2013. All within this rare, unique celestial signs that have caught the world's attention. Again, we look at the eclipse that happened just hours before Jupiter reached its ascending node, the head of the dragon right there. An eclipse took place right here between Virgo and these adversaries. Square atom at an ascending node also, reminding us of the head of the dragon right here. Just a few hours later, Jupiter reached the head of the dragon right here. These two stories, the Garden of Eden picture, and the seed of the woman and the adversary, the bruising of the heel, the bruising of the head, they're both connected. They're both part of the same thing. And these were only hours apart from each other, these events that happened. Then we jump forward in time to 2015. sign that happened between Aquarius and Pisces, right when Jupiter was at Cancer the Crab, relating to the eternal rest promised when he has crushed the head of the serpent, the head of the dragon. Our Redeemer, when that happens, we will have eternal rest. Beautiful pictures, being reminded the heavens declare it all so beautifully. And then shortly after that, in 2016, again, pointing to the reminder of the Redeemer, the one who brought the living water, makes it available when we put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Again, pointing to that same story, right at the exact same time, Jupiter was shining bright at the foot of Leo the lion, reminding us of the one who sprang out of Judah, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Shiloh, our Redeemer. Beautiful pictures, and again, the choreography and correlation, how these go together, and we've been studying them all, not just the celestial events that have happened with the Revelation 12 sign, just the eclipse, not just those singular things, but what has Jupiter been weaving during this entire time. It is what weaves all these stories together and makes the tapestry of redemption during this whole time, telling the story that goes back to the Garden of Eden, which ultimately, the promised Redeemer who brings the living water, that's him. The Lion of the tribe of Judah came to free the fish so that we can have eternal rest when he makes his enemies his footstool, when he finally crushes the head of the serpent. And then, of course, the eclipse on August 21st, 2017, reminding us again of the same story. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the one who was born of a woman. Shiloh, the one who assumed the title of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, sprang out of the tribe of Judah. He is both the root and he's the offspring. He's both, and he's the one who treads on the serpent. Again, the eclipse pointing square at that on that day, right at an ascending node, also doubly emphasizing he is about to crush the head of the serpent. This was prophesied. He is going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. And most people don't realize this, but there's far more that happened on this eclipse date than they realize. Because the moon was at an ascending node, and that's what caused the eclipse right there. The moon reached the ascending node, the head of the dragon. That's what was emphasized right there. The sun doesn't move above or below the line, just the moon does. So the moon was hitting the head of the dragon, but then it kept telling a story. Most people don't realize this, but there is a celestial sign that took place from that moment of the eclipse almost all the way up to the very moment of the Revelation 12 sign. There was a series of celestial events set in motion at that eclipse, at that sign that was pointing at the Lion of the tribe of Judah and the head of the serpent. We covered this at the time, but if you weren't on our learning journey, on that eclipse date, the eclipse happened at Leo the lion, right near Regulus. The moon had reached the ascending node right on that date. So the moon was signaling the head of the serpent. And we've covered how a draconic month goes from the period when the moon reaches ascending node, rises up, reaches the ascending node, then comes back up again and comes back to its ascending node again. That whole period of time between the ascending nodes is a draconic month. So from the time of the eclipse happened till almost a month later, the heavens were declaring from the head of the serpent with a unique rare celestial sign, walking from the head of the serpent, walking all the way down the tail of the serpent, coming to the completion of the serpent during this entire time during a unique draconic month, started by this eclipse at Leo the lion. There's a sign, a distinct draconic month that stood out because of how it started, up until September 17th and 18th, when the moon immediately went into a rare lineup with 3 different planets and Regulus again, continuing a rare series of events leading up to the fall equinox. Right before the Revelation 12 sign was the fall equinox. And what is the fall equinox? The fall equinox is when the sun crosses below the equator, remember? So at that moment, hours before the Revelation 12 sign, another celestial event marked the tail of the dragon, the tail of the serpent. So all during this month and a few days right before the Revelation 12 sign, a huge emphasis on the serpent, the head of the serpent, the head of the dragon. That's who the Lion of the tribe of Judah is going to be treading down, that serpent. Really emphasizing the Lion of the tribe of Judah, emphasizing who's his adversary, who's his enemy. The seed of the woman who was born, who is his adversary. It's the serpent. Who was trying to kill him was ultimately the serpent. The enemy named in Revelation 12, the great dragon, that old serpent. It all goes back to this whole story was declaring loudly, reminding us and recalling prophecy of what Christ is going to do. It all started and was marked with the unique and rare celestial event with the eclipse that happened, marking the start of the Draconic month, all the way to ending the Draconic month, coming back full circle literally to start a whole nother bevy of rare celestial events which pointed square at Regulus again. Happened right around Regulus. A whole month drawing attention to what the prince, the king of the Jews will do. The Lion of the tribe of Judah. The one who was born of a virgin, which goes back to the Garden of Eden prophecy. This whole time period was one massive sign, right in that time period. So when we look at the eclipse, we need to look that on the celestial clock, it was ringing from that point till the Revelation 12 sign. At that point, it was ringing very loudly. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is going to be making his enemies his footstool. This is a time frame where you should be expecting this prophecy to pick back up again, because you already know the past story. We're rehearsing it right now, we're reviewing it, but the second part of that same story is about to be fulfilled when he is about to crush the head of the serpent, crush the head of the dragon. That's what it all goes back to. And that's why we can understand when we look in Old Testament prophecy even, it mentions these specific constellations that are at the major points that go back to the astronomical understanding. That go back to, why do they call it the head of the dragon? It's because Hydra, Serpent, and Draco. He is telling us exactly, literally in this prophecy, this is going to be mapped out on the celestial clock. You will know exactly where to look. And so, here in this last generation, hearing all these cries of peace and safety, seeing all these reminders of the Star of Bethlehem, and so many celestial signs, there's only a certain area where we are to look for this story being told, because it's only going to be told in this portion along the line. We see it so strongly declared that he is about to crush the head of the serpent. He is about to start making his enemies his footstool. And he tells us the exact region of the sky to look in, right in this area. It all takes place right here. It all goes back to the prophecy that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God from henceforth, from that point, expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. There's going to be a period of waiting from that time of the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension. There's going to be a period of waiting where he had to wait till that moment when he will start making his enemies his footstool. When he opens the judgment seals. That's when those events are going to start. That's when he's going to start making his enemies his footstool. And we know it's going to cover the angels that were cast out with Draco. Again, it all goes back to Draco. Saying on the clock, right within this portion of these three celestial markers that he's pointed out, all deals with and covers all of that. It's been rehearsing it all. And it all goes back to ultimately crushing the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent, the devil, Satan, which also goes back to the Garden of Eden. How our Redeemer is going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. And he's told us very clearly where to look on the clock, and he's told us we will see the day approaching. Now within this window of time, within this ribbon that Jupiter has been weaving, we've also seen another eclipse. And that was on July 2nd, 2019. That again happened right in the second figure in Gemini, right in that same area where Jupiter had woven out and marked out that path when it was first starting after it had risen at the head of the serpent, marked out that path. So the last total solar eclipse that's going to happen within this window reminds us and looks back at the prophecy, how it all goes back to the Garden of Eden, right at a time when the one who's been weaving this whole story is right at the foot of Ophiuchus, represents Shiloh, who's had his heel bruised by the enemy before. But he is going to be crushing the head of the serpent. This is the time frame to be expecting it, and we see it so loudly declared. And we've seen it so strongly emphasized, especially with the lineup that's at this time. How it's been emphasizing all these adversaries that are even named, including Hydra, including all the third of the stars. All this emphasized here at this time, right at the right foot of Ophiuchus. This is the consummation of the prophecy, the one born of a woman, the one who had his heel bruised, this same individual, this same character, who had his heel bruised by this character. He will bruise that character's head and crush it. The story picks up right here. This is where we're even told to look. These are even the enemies we are told to understand and identify in the sky, where to look for them, understand where the story is going to take place. It all takes place. The second part picks up and takes place right here. And again, we're not surprised with how the Lord's also recently shown us a third of the stars mapped out from Draco, his stars, a third of his stars mapped out along this journey that we've seen since the star first appeared over here in Leo. marked out along the ecliptic, if they're the stars, a line right in line with the stinger, right again at the right foot of Ophiuchus, right in line with all these adversaries being made a footstool, treading on their head. Again, it all goes back to what we've seen emphasized during this time, the head of the dragon, the head of the serpent. That is what he's coming to do. He will bruise his head. He will crush his head. That's what the word bruise there means. Crush it. He is going to be making his enemies his footstool. He's going to be putting his foot down on them and subduing them completely. We see this so loudly declared in the heavens right now, telling us that time is very short and our expectation is very high. Christ will do exactly what he said he's going to do. And the more that we study this story, we understand the celestial choreography, the celestial mechanics. We see the celestial pictures that are even specifically told, look at these pictures. We can see the richness of the statement. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God, from henceforth, expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. There is so much depth in that one sentence when we see how it is so loudly declared and so richly declared in the heavens right now. We truly can see the day approaching. When we look on the timeline, we see that time is very short. These pictures are coming together. These signs will not be strung or in line for much longer. Again, in about a month, the sun will be catching up with Jupiter. Jupiter's going to be off the scene for a little bit as well. Right now is when the signs are strongest. After about November 9th, it's all going to be downhill from here. The signs are pointing to this time right now, where all these enemies are in a line. Jupiter, which has been weaving this whole story, has brought us to this point here right now, which is highlighting all of his enemies. They're all in a line right now. We see the day approaching, and that's what we are told to expect. See the day of judgment, the day of indignation in the approach. We know that is coming. There is a marked time, a marked season in the lights in the firmament that God put there for signs, spelling out that, yes, you will see that day approaching. Live accordingly. And that is what we need to do at this late hour. Know the time and live accordingly. Definitely check out our discipleship resources. Find links in the description box. When to watch. What did Christ say about when his coming was going to be? What were his warnings that he gave? Why did he emphasize to his servants so many times, be ye ready, watch, prepare yourselves, watch and pray, knowing he is coming? He gave us instructions, he gave us warnings, he gave us exhortations. He told us, this is what I want to find you doing when I return. And he meant it. He wants us to run for the prize. He has placed a course, a race in front of every one of us when we put our faith and trust in him to see, are we going to run toward him? Do we really love him? Or do we just want a ticket to heaven? And Scripture makes it very clear. There's a lot of Christians who will go to heaven, who will have everything burned up, all their rewards, the wood, the hay, the stubble. They will lose their crowns, they will lose their rewards. But yes, they will still be in heaven. But they will be completely broke. And friend, I don't want that to be you. I want you to finish strong. I don't want you to lose rewards. I don't want you to lose your crowns. I don't want you to lose fellowship and privilege and access to Jesus Christ in eternity. I want you to finish your race strong, so that our Redeemer can say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of thy Lord. I want you to enter into the joy of your Lord. There's a lot of Christians who won't. They will be in heaven, but they will not have the fellowship that others do. I want you to enter into the joy of our Lord. And this is why we've prepared these resources. When we look at all these signs coming together, everyone is quick to say, wow, Christ is going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. All the promises. And that's what everybody likes to dwell on. But we have to look at his warnings, his exhortations, and his instructions as well. And when we look up and we lift up our heads and we see the celestial time, we have to realize and remind ourselves, Christ will do exactly everything that he said he's going to do. And if he warns us to do something, we had better do it, because he is going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. There is a reason Christ calls for a watching, a vigilance, and a soberness when we know the time. It is not just enough to be informed of the time, to just be informed of the promises. We must be informed of his instructions, his exhortations, and heed his warnings. And even the book of Revelation starts out with a reminder to the reader to read and heed. It is not just enough to be informed by reading and seeing. We must heed. We must put into practice what he says. We must live as though he's about to return, because he is going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. And as we look at these signs, let that impress upon us that that is true. And as we obey and cast off the works of darkness and put on the Lord Jesus Christ, as we have an ear to hear and obey what the Spirit saith unto the churches, there is great comfort and promises for the wise and faithful servants. And that is what I want to encourage you to do. This is a time when we need to be the wise men. It was not enough just for the wise men to see the star and say, "Oh, the Messiah was born today." No, the signs were meant to affect how they lived. They saw the signs and they acted on what they saw. They rose up and they went out to worship the King. It affected how they lived. And the same for us today. When we see the signs, it's not just for mental head knowledge. It's to affect how we live. To stir us up to be the wise and faithful servants who go out and worship our Lord, our Redeemer, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, Shiloh, with our life. All of our heart, all of our soul, all of our strength, and all of our mind, as a worship and demonstration of how much we love our Lord. We've seen so many signs declaring the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Why? Is it not just enough to sit here and wait till he comes to us? No. He wants us to rise up and go out to meet him halfway. Meet him with our lives, rising up and shining bright for him, showing him, I love you and I want to be close to you. That is what our life demonstrates when we go forward. This is why we are called, exhorted to trim our lamps, cast off the works of darkness, put on the armor of light, put on our Lord Jesus Christ, go out to meet him, draw nigh to him, sup with him, especially when you know the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him, like the wise men. Go ye out to meet him. Go ye out to worship him. And friend, that's what I want to encourage you to do. Let's have an ear to hear, hands and heart to obey, loving him and serving him first and highest above all else. Maranatha.